The story begins in a small town where life seemed ordinary on the surface. People went about their days with predictable routines: coffee at the same corner cafe, work at the local factory, children running through the schoolyard at recess. But behind the ordinary, there were lives full of struggles, secrets, and quiet heartbreak. One of those lives belonged to Daniel, a single father in his early 30s who worked 2 jobs to provide for his 7-year-old daughter, Emily. Daniel wasn't the type of man to complain. Life had dealt him hard blows. His wife had passed away during childbirth, leaving him to raise their daughter alone. For years he carried both the role of mother and father, though the absence of his wife was something he felt deeply every day. He poured his love into Emily, trying to make her childhood as bright as possible despite his own grief. But lately, he had noticed something that broke his heart in a way he wasn't prepared for. Emily never smiled. She was quiet, polite, and always obedient, but the sparkle he often saw in other children's eyes was missing in hers. At birthday parties, while other kids laughed and chased balloons, Emily sat on the sidelines, watching with solemn eyes. At school performances, she sang the words, but without enthusiasm. Even at home, when he tried to make her laugh with silly voices or pancakes shaped like animals, she gave only the faintest of smiles, the kind that never reached her eyes. At first, Daniel thought it was just her personality, maybe she was simply a serious child. But deep down, he worried. He wondered if she carried the sadness of never having known her mother. He asked teachers if Emily was being bullied, but they said she was well behaved, just quiet. Still, the emptiness in her little face gnawed at him until he decided he had to do something. He couldn't stand the thought of his little girl growing up without joy. One evening, after a long shift, Daniel sat beside Emily at the dinner table. "Sweetheart," he said gently, "you know you can tell me anything, right? If something's bothering you at school, or with friends." She looked up from her plate, her big brown eyes thoughtful, then shook her head. "I'm fine, Daddy," she whispered. And though he wanted to believe her, Daniel's heart told him there was more beneath the surface. It wasn't until a few weeks later that the story took a turn that would change everything. Daniel had dropped Emily off at school as usual, kissing her on the forehead and telling her to have a good day. But that afternoon, he got a call that made his blood run cold. It wasn't from the school, it was from the police station. An officer told him to come quickly. His daughter was there. When he arrived, his heart pounded in his chest. There was Emily, clutching a small stuffed bear, her face streaked with tears. She was sitting beside a female officer, who had her arm wrapped gently around her. Daniel rushed forward, kneeling before her. "Emily, what happened? Are you hurt?" She shook her head, but fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. The officer cleared her throat and explained. Emily had run into the station on her way home from school. She had burst through the doors, crying out, "Please follow me home." Officers had followed her, concerned, and what they found left them shaken. Emily led them to a neighbor's house just down the street from Daniel's. Inside, in a dimly lit room, they discovered another little girl, maybe 5 years old, sitting on the floor surrounded by empty food wrappers and unwashed clothes. She was frail, dirty, and her eyes were hollow. She hadn't been attending school, and nobody had realized she even lived there. Her parents, it turned out, were addicted to drugs and had been neglecting her for months. Emily had noticed. Every day walking home, she saw the girl peeking through the cracked blinds. And though Emily herself was so quiet, she carried the weight of what she saw until finally, she couldn't take it anymore. "Daddy," Emily whispered in the police station, clutching his sleeve. She never smiled either. "Just like me." Those words cut straight through Daniel. Suddenly, he understood. Emily's sadness wasn't just about losing her mother, it was about the weight of compassion too heavy for her young heart. She saw pain in others and held it inside herself. She couldn't smile because she knew another child was suffering in silence, unseen by the world. The authorities took the neglected girl, whose name was Lily, into protective custody. But the story didn't end there. Emily begged her father, "Please, Daddy, can we help her? She needs a family." Daniel, overwhelmed by his daughter's plea, knew this was a turning point. He had always struggled to raise one child on his own. How could he manage two? His finances were tight, his hours at work long, and he barely slept as it was. But when he looked into Emily's eyes, full of hope for the first time in years, he realized something. Maybe this was the very thing that could bring joy back to her life. The road wasn't easy. At first, social services said it was unlikely for a single father with limited income to be considered as a foster parent. But Daniel refused to give up. He took on extra shifts, fixed up the spare room in their tiny apartment, and attended every court and social worker meeting with unwavering determination. Emily, for the first time in her young life, began to smile, not wide, but soft, glowing smiles that carried hope. She wrote letters to Lily while they waited, drew pictures of the three of them together, and prayed each night that her new friend would come home to them. Months passed, filled with obstacles and doubts. But Daniel's persistence and Emily's pure-hearted plea eventually moved even the toughest social workers. The day finally came when Lily walked through the door of their apartment, holding a small backpack with all her belongings. She looked around nervously, but when Emily ran to her, throwing her arms around her, something magical happened. Both girls smiled, real, radiant smiles that lit up the room. For Daniel, that moment was everything. His daughter's joy, once locked away, bloomed like spring flowers after a long winter. Their home was far from perfect. Money was still tight, and the challenges of raising two children alone were endless. But laughter began to fill the rooms. Emily smiled when she helped Lily with homework, when they baked cookies together, when they all sat on the couch watching movies under a blanket. And Daniel realized that sometimes, the path to happiness isn't found in fixing what's broken alone, but in healing alongside others. The town soon learned of their story, and neighbors who once barely noticed Daniel began stepping in to help. One brought groceries, another offered to babysit, and the community slowly rallied around them. Emily's once quiet presence became a beacon of kindness at school, inspiring her classmates to look out for others too. And Lily, once a silent shadow of a child, grew stronger, healthier, and full of life. In the end, what began as a heartbreaking observation, a father noticing his daughter never smiled, became a story of compassion, resilience, and the power of choosing love even when life feels overwhelming. Emily's tears at the police station led to something no one expected, two little girls finding joy, and a father discovering that his capacity to love was greater than his fears. And perhaps the most touching part. Years later, at Emily's high school graduation, Daniel stood in the crowd, tears in his eyes, watching her laugh with Lily by her side. Both girls smiled as if they had never forgotten the moment their lives changed forever, the day one small act of courage opened the door to love, healing, and family.